Hi there, I'm Vincent Bos and I provide dating and self-improvement advice. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing how your ex will reach out on New Year's Eve. I provide audio coaching for breakup recovery, trying to get an ex back, attracting someone new, and life coaching. Visit www.dateme.tips for more details. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. Check out my socials for extra content. The links are in the description. So now let's get back into today's podcast. And today we are discussing how your ex will reach out on New Year's Eve. So if you have been dumped and want to try to get your ex back, you will likely be hoping that they reach out on New Year's Eve. But if they do, how will they do it? And what does it mean? In today's podcast, I'll be discussing 3 examples of how and why your ex-dumper might contact you on New Year's Eve. So let's get straight into this, and point number 1 is the basic text. So probably the most likely possibility of your ex-dumper reaching out to you on New Year's Eve is via a basic text. And when I say basic text, I'm meaning something such as Happy New Year. Something as simple as that. Now, is this likely? Well, I've heard of many dumpees receive such messages. So does this mean your ex-dumper will definitely send you Happy New Year? No, it doesn't. But it does mean that there is a chance it could take place. Now, it's important for me to say that if you don't hear from your ex on New Year's Eve, it doesn't mean you can't hear from them a little bit further down the line. It's not New Year's Eve or nothing. Okay, it doesn't mean that you can't hear from them again in the future. You might hear from them on a random day in March, for instance. It doesn't have to be a special day on the calendar. However, special days on the calendar definitely have more pull. And what I mean by pull is the emotions, the thoughts, the memories, the triggers of the past are likely to make your ex-dumper think of you. New Year's Eve is a natural moment to think back through the year that is coming to an end. And if you and your ex-dumper were together in a relationship during the year that is coming to an end, well, they're going to be thinking of you. Now, if you and your now ex actually were together last New Year's Eve, well, there's even more reason for them to be thinking of you. Because New Year's Eve doesn't just make us think of the year that's gone by, it also makes us think of last New Year's Eve, last 31st of December. If you were together, well, you're definitely going to be in your ex-dumper's thoughts. So this is why there is an opportunity they might reach out to you. But as I said, it doesn't mean it has to happen this way. Even if they don't reach out, they will think of you, and therefore it could be moving things further down the line of where they eventually do get to the stage of where they want to make contact. But going back to point number 1 and the basic text, the whole concept of your ex-dumper sending you a Happy New Year, well, if you receive this, the first thing you're probably going to be thinking is, was this really directed at me? Or is this just a blanket text that they've sent to everybody in my contact list? Now, if this was 10, 15 years ago, I would say that this is a very strong possibility. Back in the day, the early days of texting, we could call it, sending a blanket text out was something that people definitely did more regularly. There were options on your phone, for instance, which made this very easy indeed. Those early phone models seem to have a much easier way, it seems, of just sending out this blanket text to all contacts. Now, don't get me wrong, I know that you could still do that on a modern phone or using a modern messaging app, but it doesn't seem to be as common. Okay, you don't seem to hear people say as often nowadays that that is what they do. Whereas before, 10, 15 years ago, it was common. You know, those of you who remember back then, I'm sure you can remember doing it yourself or receiving it yourself. It was very easy, instead of sending a message individually to every single person, just to send out that blanket text. In particular, because a number of years ago, texts seemed to get lost, okay? You would send a New Year's Eve text and the person might not receive it until days later, if ever. They might never have got your message. These messages used to get lost in the fact that everything was overloaded during New Year's Eve. This, again, doesn't seem to happen anymore. So whereas back then, people didn't want to send individually, because it seems to take a long time. Will it go through? Will it not? Am I being told it's delivered? Is it not? This would be a very long process. You would just click the send to all contacts and see what happened. Nowadays, that doesn't seem to be as common. Okay, messages don't seem to get lost. This isn't really a problem, and therefore I don't see people as often sending blanket texts. So if you do receive a text from your ex-dumper, even if it is just saying something very basic, such as Happy New Year, I would say that this is very likely to be genuine. Now, does it mean anything? Well, if they're sending you this deliberately and it's not part of a blanket text, this means that they have thought about you and they have typed it up. It might not have a whole lot of information within it, but it is them taking the time, even though it's just a few seconds, taking the time to send you that text. If I was you and you received such a text, I would respond in kind. I would respond by saying Happy New Year back to them and maybe adding a question to see if you can grow that conversation. So if you receive a text saying Happy New Year, I would respond by saying Happy New Year! Exclamation mark. How is your night going? Something as simple as that, just to see if you can grow the conversation. So now let's get into point number 2 and the second point of today's podcast. Please like this video if you're watching on YouTube, and if you have the new hype feature, please hype this video as well. If you like my content, subscribe to the channel to keep updated. And point number 2 is the confusing voicemail. Now you might be listening to today's podcast and thinking, I'm not going to get a voicemail off my ex. Well, I'm not saying that you will, but what I am saying is that I've heard of a situation play out numerous times. If not, actually the call being picked up by the dumpee and having a conversation which sounds confusing. But it does seem that voicemails seem to be more common than actually the dumpee picking up. Now, why is this? Is this because the dumpee deliberately doesn't answer? Is it because the dumpee doesn't notice the call due to the busy festivities? Is it something where the dumpee didn't realise their phone was ringing for some weird reason and then they just noticed they have a voicemail? It doesn't matter how it plays out. What matters is that I've heard this numerous times, that a dumper will send a voicemail to their ex, the dumpee. And when the dumpee listens to it, they are confused. And this is often because the message doesn't make a whole load of sense. Maybe it's hard to hear. Maybe it kind of goes in and out. Maybe the words being said don't make sense. Maybe you're questioning whether your ex-dumper is drunk. And that is a very fair comment to make. It's New Year's Eve. Lots of people have a drink. And this could easily be the reason why your dumper has called you. Now, was this deliberately to you? Was this a message that they're trying to send you deliberately? Well, I would say more often than not, the likelihood is yes. Most of the time, a dumper sending and leaving a voicemail for their dumpee is genuine, even though it might not make a whole load of sense. The fact they might be drunk, okay, that might have given them the impetus, you could say, to leave this message and to give you a call, but it doesn't mean it's not from a genuine place. I'm sure you would have heard people say that when someone is drunk, the truth comes out. Now, of course, this isn't always the case, but certainly it lowers our inhibitions and it starts to remove some of that fear from what we might be about to do. If your ex-dumper is wanting to reach out to you, but feeling nervous and scared about how you would react, well, if they're drunk, this could be something that they decide to do a little easier. The problem, of course, is that when you hear what they are saying, it might not make a whole lot of sense. It might not be very coherent when you're trying to understand what is being said and what this is meaning. The ultimate point here is that if your ex-dumper has left you a voicemail, they are trying to communicate. Whether you can understand that communication, well, that's a different matter, but they are trying to communicate. Now, if you hear the message and it is absolutely clearly meant for someone else, okay, maybe this wasn't meant for you, but the fact that they've sent it to you means that at least on a subconscious level, you're in their mind. Because they're trying to call someone else, probably drunk, and yet they've actually called you. So even though this message isn't really for you, in some instances, it is still going to be meaningful that they are thinking about you. Now, what do you do if you receive such a voicemail? Well, my suggestion is you send them a text saying, Happy New Year. I had a voicemail from you, but I couldn't really hear too much. Are you okay? And this is how you can try and see if they want to communicate further, because if they do, they're going to respond to this message and they're going to let you know what they was meaning and that hopefully they are okay, and this could be something which potentially grows. Now we have to say that with anything on New Year's Eve, especially where drink might be involved, we have to understand that the following day, when everybody sobers up, things might seem a little different to everybody involved. Your ex-dumper may have called you, potentially drunk, but then when they're no longer drunk the following day, maybe they don't feel it was the best idea. So does this mean if you receive a drunk call that you're going to get your ex back? Well, no, it doesn't mean that necessarily, but it does mean they're thinking of you. And whether or not you can grow that conversation at the time, whether they unfortunately disappear a few days into January, the main thing is they were thinking about you, and what this shows is that they could think of you again. Now, if you would like advice and support about how to try and increase the chance of one day getting your ex back, then you may want to consider my audio coaching service, where me and you can speak one-on-one about your unique specific situation. Go to my website www.dateme.tips for more information about how I can become your coach and your teammate via my audio coaching service. Talking about your feelings can also improve your mental health. It helps prevent the buildup of negative emotions, which can lead to stress, anxiety, depression, and even physical health issues. Speak your heart to free your mind. So now let's get into point number 3 and the final point of today's podcast. If you feel that this podcast has helped you, then please consider buying me a coffee. The link to do so is in the description. And point number 3 is the conspiracy theory. So today we're speaking about if and when your ex-dumper reaches out to you, what does it mean and how would they likely do it? And point number 3 is the conspiracy theory. And this is where you believe they've reached out to you, whereas maybe anybody else you tell the story to might disagree that it counts as a reach out. Either way, whether you are right, whether you are wrong, it is something which many dumpees tell me and plays on their mind. So the first example of point number 3 is that they watch your story. So let's just say, for instance, you're putting a story out there on New Year's Eve on your socials, and you find out that your ex-dumper has viewed your story, and they haven't viewed your story for many months. Okay? Something along those lines. What does this mean? Are they reaching out to you? Well, certainly not in the traditional sense. But if they've not watched any of your stories for months and months and months, and then they watch your story on New Year's Eve, are they trying to convey a message? Are they trying to say, I'm watching your story, I want to communicate with you, I want to get back together? Well, I would say, look, we need to try and stay as calm and relaxed as possible. Is it a good sign they're viewing your story? Yes, it is. But does it mean they want to get back together with you? Well, we can't say that right now. Maybe it will develop into that, but maybe it won't. We'll have to see how things progress. Now, we all know that you could watch a story accidentally. Okay, unfortunately, your ex-dumper viewing one of your stories doesn't mean that they are regularly, deliberately viewing your stories. It could have been an accident. So in this instance, I would try and stay calm, relaxed, and positive, and then see if in the future your ex-dumper views more stories. Because if they do, that is less likely to be a mistake or an accident or a coincidence, and more likely that they are viewing your stories because they're interested in your life. Now, I would say it's very important not to get hung up on whether your ex-dumper views or doesn't view your stories. Checking your ex's online activity, seeing what they do on their socials and how they react to yours isn't healthy, and it's not going to help you. But I know that no matter what I say and suggest, you are going to be paying attention to this. So I would say if they view your story, it can be seen as a good sign, a first step of them thinking about you, but let's just see how this progresses. Now, the second conspiracy theory I want to speak about in point number 3 is that they are wearing something you bought them in a photo, video, or story that they post on New Year's Eve. They're wearing something that you spent a lot of money on. They know that you bought them it, and hence, if they're wearing this, are they trying to send you a message that they're still interested? Well, unfortunately, I would say this is less likely to be a deliberate way of them communicating with you. If you see that they are wearing something on New Year's Eve or any day, and you think, well, why would they be wearing this in a photo, video, or story? They know that I bought them it. Why would they do this? Well, I would say the likely reason they are wearing something is because they like it. whether or not you bought them it is probably not really on their mind. Whether or not you see that they are wearing something that you bought them, again, I wouldn't say that it's likely to be on their mind. These type of covert messages, these conspiracy theories as I'm calling them, I don't see a big connection. So if your ex-dumper is wearing something that you bought them, I don't think necessarily they're trying to convey anything to you. And the final conspiracy theory that I'm going to speak about in today's podcast is that they are listening to a meaningful song on an account that you can see. Now, whether this is a shared account, something like Spotify, whether this is something that you can just see and tell what they are listening to right now, and you know that there is some meaning behind a song that they are listening currently, what does this mean? Well, I would say, although there is definitely meaning to why they are choosing to listen to a song, unless of course you're looking at a real strange connection and you're really trying to add everything together to make something that isn't really there. If there is a clear connection with a song that they're listening to, yes, there is meaning. Yes, they are likely thinking of things, potentially including you, with it being New Year's Eve, everything pieces together. But what I would say is that we need to see more than this, because even though you might think, well, they know that I can see what they're listening to, that isn't enough for me to believe that they are closer to reconnecting with you at this time. It could be a good sign. It could be that they are thinking about you in a more emotional way. But what we need to see is them taking that next step and actually reaching out to you. Which, as I said earlier, it doesn't have to be on New Year's Eve. It could be a first step today, which leads to the moment in February, March, April time where they actually take that leap. Ultimately, you can't be waiting for your ex. There is no 100% guaranteed way to get an ex back. Nothing works 100% of the time, and nothing fails 100% of the time. You can't be waiting around. You must live your life. And if you hear from your ex in the future, or if you even hear from them tonight on New Year's Eve, well, that's brilliant. But if you don't, you will still find happiness, and your ex-dumper does not control your happiness in the future.